Well, let's continue our analysis now. Joining me here on set is Célia Belin. She's head of the Paris office of the European Council of Foreign Relations here in Paris. She's also an invited researcher at the Brookings Institute in Washington. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us today. There really is no doubt now, is there, that we're heading for a rematch, if you like, Trump versus Biden in November?
Well, there was almost no doubt yesterday as well. So it's just a confirmation of what we had seen, which was domination by Donald Trump in the Republican field, and with almost a mathematical impossibility for Nikki Haley to be an actual challenger to Donald Trump. And on the other side, on the Biden side, of course, he's the incumbent. He's decided more than a year ago that he wanted to try again to seek re-election, and therefore, apart from displeasure from a part of electorates who would like him to be a younger man, who would like him to be a different candidate, maybe he's still, winning across the board. So we do have now we already know who's going to face whom in November.
At least we know where we are, I suppose. I mean, voters in the US seem very unenthusiastic, don't they, about this rematch. What about us here in Europe? Let's start off talking about each candidate. Joe Biden, how enthusiastic would you be, do you think Europeans would be, about the idea of an ongoing Biden presidency?
Well, it has to be compared to the alternative. That's the first point, so which makes Europeans more likely to support Joe Biden. But also, it's in the light of what's happened in the past 2 years since the Russian attack and aggression on Ukraine. Joe Biden has proven to be able to be the American president that leads Europe, that leads the Western world, that is cementing transatlantic solidarity. Even when there are divisions among Europeans, the Americans have sought to find a consensus amongst Europeans and with Europeans. As far as the Ukraine war is concerned, this would be of major importance to have someone sitting in the Oval Office that is continued belief that a strategic defeat should be imposed to Russia on the battlefield in Ukraine, that is ready to support financially Ukraine in the long run, and generally that has a positive outlook on cooperation with Europe, with the Trade and Technology Council, for example. So all across the board, you have a cooperative American president, which in itself is a big plus.
Cooperative, yes. Is that the same for Donald Trump, I suppose, is the next question?
Well, not at all. We all remember what's happened during the first mandate of Donald Trump, where you had high opposition between Europeans and Americans on all across the board. Famously, Donald Trump said that the European Union was even worse than China, which is quite something to say. And he was talking mostly about trade. He was a very fierce trade advocate for the US and competitor to the EU and to China. He imposed tariffs and on the military front and the security front, he was also one of the biggest criticism of European allies who did not spend enough on defense, which is a classic criticism. Arguably, Barack Obama and his administration also criticized Europeans. But the difference with Donald Trump, it's that he has always inserted an element of doubt of whether he would actually stand with NATO allies in case of an aggression. The aggression has already happened under Biden's watch, but if it has to, now shift to Trump, the question would remain, would Donald Trump be able to be that leader president, to be on the side of Europeans? And it's more than a doubt. There's almost certainty that things would change. They are already changing in anticipation of his potential return.
I mean, Donald Trump hasn't he threatened to pull out of NATO altogether?
Yes, so he has in the past said, that he was disregarding Article 5, or that he was not really interested in NATO solidarity or security guarantees. He might have, he talked about pulling out of NATO, actually did not, he said later that he was only using this as leverage for European allies to spend more. He's sort of doing that again, but increasing the pressure by saying most recently that Russia could do whatever the hell they wanted to allies who didn't pay up for defense. One of the issues is that it's as if he's not taking into account all the investment that Europeans have made. He's pretending that only Americans and the US are paying for Ukraine's defense, only them are mobilizing and investing in defense, which is not at all the case. Things have changed a lot in the past 2 years. So really, there's no way of knowing how much this would be put in place. What we know is also Donald Trump's intention to potentially strike a deal with Putin immediately after taking office. That's his fantasy. That's the ideal that he would like to seek. He wants to put an end to the war in Ukraine. And for this, he's probably ready to arm wrestle the Europeans and the Ukrainians.
You said that things are starting to change already. I mean, do you think Europe is prepared enough, though, for the possibility of Donald Trump?
Rather that it started to change in the US, actually. The supplemental package that was supposed to fund Ukraine aid and Israel aid and also border security is stuck in Congress because of a minority of Trumpian congressmen and women who are trying to have their way in not funding Ukraine anymore. And by that token, Europeans have taken note and are already sort of putting in place the type of support, military support for Ukraine, but also the type of rhetoric that would counter that element. Most recently, the French President Emmanuel Macron, as recently as 3 days ago, said that he was, that France and other European countries would be ready to send military personnel on the ground, not necessarily to combat, but that there was a conversation on it, not really ready now, but that the conversation should be open on that front. And this is a direct consequence of Europeans and French trying to, jump over this potential risk of Donald Trump returning to the White House.
I mean, Emmanuel Macron, didn't he, last year even said, didn't he, and was strongly criticised for saying that Europe has got to start standing on its own. It can't rely on the US in the future. I mean, he's been proved right, hasn't he?
But just not quite there yet, right? So there is a majority in Congress, both on the Republican and Democratic side, for voting the supplemental on Ukraine, actually. What's standing in the way is a minority of Trumpian congressmen who are blocking the Speaker of the House, who's not taking it, taking upon himself to bring this vote to the floor. But so potentially, actually, if this issue would be overcome, you would have the supplemental package. If you have a re-election of Joe Biden, you actually don't have a major change. The issue for Europeans is that it's an either or. There's almost a 50-50% chance of seeing Joe Biden or Donald Trump sitting in the White House in a year. And that makes the whole difference. So there's contingency plan, but it's extremely difficult to plan in such an uncertainty.
Great to have your analysis on the programme today. Thank you very much for coming in and talking to us. Célia Belin, who's head of the Paris office of the European Council of Foreign Relations here in Paris. Thanks.